there are moments in combat that you get temporarily insane, I think, because a rational person, a reasonable person, would not do those things.
Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States was in a state of pandemonium. A sense of distrust arose towards Japanese Americans following their native country's attack. Despite the stereotypes and stipulations surrounding Japanese Americans at the time, Daniel Inouye went on to break the long-standing social barriers as he enlisted into the U.S. Army as an Asian American. He also became one of the longest-serving politicians and had a prosperous political career. Inouye showed how minorities, despite facing persecution, could go on to benefit the lives of many. The early 1900s were a very imperialistic time period for many nations in the world, especially the Empire of Japan. An island nation with a scarce and quickly decreasing supply of natural resources, Japan was on the prowl for the necessities to keep their country running, but the US slowed their expansion. Japan was attempting to expand by conquering parts of a crippled China. The Japanese eventually declared war on China in 1937, starting the Second Sino-Japanese War. This resulted in the Nanjing Massacre, the raping and murder of Chinese in Nanjing by Japanese soldiers, and other atrocities. This poor treatment of the Chinese by the Japanese saw that the US imposed economic sanctions and embargoes, just angering the Japanese. Ultimately, the Japanese were going to have to go through the US to expand their desired extent. This eventually led the Japanese to attack the Navy base located on Pearl Harbor in Honolulu, Hawaii. Daniel Inouye was born on September 7, 1924, in Honolulu, Hawaii. The son of an immigrant father and second-generation American mother, Inouye's family was at the bottom economically. During Inouye's childhood, the American economy was at an all-time low. With the Great Depression starting in 1929, employment was difficult to come by. Unemployment rates were reaching a record 24.9%, and Daniel Inouye's father worked on a sugar plantation. Inouye was living in an ethnic enclave and wasn't exactly wealthy. His family was able to survive, but Inouye's childhood wasn't the most comfortable. During Inouye's childhood, Europe was disjointed and war was nearing. With World War II starting when Inouye was in high school, the US was able to remain neutral despite such high tensions, but when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in his junior year, Daniel Inouye's life was quickly and completely thrown upside down. Through the beginning of World War II, the United States remained neutral. Just recovering from the largest economic depression in history, the United States was trying to avoid spending resources on a European conflict. Jumping right into a world war across the Atlantic in Europe could cripple the economy again and was risky, but in the early morning on December 7, 1941, the Japanese bombed a stationed American Navy base off the coast of Honolulu, Hawaii. The attack caught the US by some surprise and damaged the stationed Navy base heavily. As military leaders anticipated an attack closer to Japan, Pearl Harbor was unguarded. The lack of protection led to about 20 American vessels and 300 airplanes being damaged or destroyed. Nearly 2,400 lives were claimed, including civilians, and an extra 1,000 were wounded. This day marked the entrance of the U.S. into World War II as the current president Franklin D. Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan the next day. Soon after the attack, the United States was filled with a sense of fear towards Japanese people. Soon the American military was attempting to send thousands of Japanese located in Hawaii to internment camps and placed a ban on Japanese Americans enlisting. Hawaii's economy depended too highly on Japanese labor, which spared Daniel Inouye from being shipped away. As a high school student, Daniel Inouye was constantly questioned and insulted regarding his race and patriotism. Curfews and rules were set, and due to an event Inouye had no part in, his life became even more rigorous. At the beginning of World War II in 1941, Japanese Americans were not allowed in the United States Army. In fact, the beginning of the war was a time where many Japanese Americans were being persecuted for their race. The US government classified them as enemy aliens and enemies of the state and shipped those of Japanese descent into isolated internment camps, an atrocious violation of these American citizens' civil rights. These camps were essentially prisons and prevented Japanese Americans from escaping. Later, in 1943, the ban on Japanese Americans in the United States Army was lifted, and Inouye was presented with a choice to either enlist or to become a part of the internment camps. He enlisted and volunteered to be a part of the segregated 442nd Combat Team. The combat team he joined was solely Japanese Americans and went on to become one of the most decorated combat units in the history of American warfare due to the courageousness of its members. Inouye was deployed to Italy and then to France. Through this, Inouye worked his way up through the ranks, first to sergeant and then to second lieutenant. During an attack in Italy, Inouye was wounded through a shot to his stomach, an injury that should have cast him out for the rest of the battle. However, ignoring his injury, he got up and continued to fight, destroying 2/3 of enemy machine gun nests. He collapsed from blood loss, but got back up and began to fire on the enemy again. He was then hit with a grenade, which instantly amputated most of his right arm. He continued to fight, getting back up and killing the German gunner who threw the grenade at him. He continued forward, fighting the enemy until he was hit with his 5th wound of the day, a shot to the leg which finally knocked him down, where he was then taken to a field hospital to be treated for his horrific injuries. Despite his injuries, Inouye remained in the army until 1947, until he was honorably discharged with the rank of captain, Bronze Star Medal recipient, the Purple Heart, and the Distinguished Service Cross, all for his immense courage and bravery he showcased throughout his army career. After the army, Inouye spent nearly 2 years recovering from his aforementioned injuries. Daniel Inouye's career in government began early on. He attended the prominent university of his home state, the University of Hawaii, and earned a bachelor's degree in government and economics. He then went on to study at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., earning a degree in law. He practiced politics in the Hawaiian territorial government until 1959, when Hawaii officially became a state, which marked the beginning of Inouye's illustrious 43-year career in American government. While Inouye was serving in Congress, he accomplished many projects and was a member of many committees, one of which being the Watergate Investigation Committee, where he and several other congressmen investigated the recent Watergate scandal involving President Richard Nixon. In 1987, Inouye served as chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Secret Military Assistance to Iran and the Nicaraguan opposition, which investigated the Iran-Contra affair. He was also chairman and vice chairman of the Select Committee on Indian Affairs from 1987 to 2005. In January 2009, Inouye was appointed chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee following the resignation of West Virginia Senator Robert C. Byrd. He also replaced Byrd as president pro tempore of the Senate after Byrd's death in 2010. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese Empire, anti-Japanese sentiment grew tremendously here in the United States. Daniel Inouye blatantly defied this racial profiling to serve heroically for a nation that maltreated and victimized him and his culture. Inouye broke more barriers of race by becoming the first Asian American elected to Congress and serving nearly half a decade, the second longest career in American history. During World War II, as the Japanese negative racial stereotype arose, Daniel Inouye, despite the odds, became one of the most decorated soldiers of World War II. Inouye had an additional burden to prove his loyalty to America due to the attack on Pearl Harbor and the stigma surrounding Japanese Americans thereafter. He served valiantly in the 442nd Regiment and received multiple military medals such as the Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and the highest achievement, the Medal of Honor. Despite the racial prejudice still being very prevalent, Inouye proceeded to become the first Japanese American to serve on the Senate and House of Representatives. Despite being racially profiled to an extreme degree, Daniel Inouye broke through the barrier of racial persecution and became a decorated American hero and servant of the same people that victimized him and his culture. Inouye did not let his racial oppressors hold him back. He was a fighter and a hero, and he valiantly served on the battlefield and on Capitol Hill, serving the same nation that saw him as an enemy. Inouye could not be stopped by racial barriers, and our country is undoubtedly better off because of his perseverance.